The conference room aboard Zenith Prime Station was filled with representatives from 40 different species. They sat in carefully designed chairs that accommodated their various body types, breathing air mixed to satisfy everyone's needs. At the center of the circular table stood Commander Jake Morrison, the first human to address the Galactic Council's military committee. He was tall by human standards, with short dark hair and calm eyes that had seen too much combat. Next to him sat Dr. Lisa Grant, a scientist who had spent the last 5 years learning alien languages and customs. Behind them stood Lieutenant Danny Hayes, young and eager, his hand never far from the weapon at his hip. The other species watched the humans with obvious discomfort. The Valorians, tall and slender with crystalline skin that reflected light in rainbow patterns, kept their distance. The Kresh, insectoid beings with compound eyes and clicking mandibles, shifted nervously in their seats. The Quelon, amphibious creatures from a water world, stayed in their environment suits and observed through thick glass visors. Every species in the room knew what Earth was, a deathworld, a planet so violent and hostile that it produced creatures unlike anything else in the galaxy. Admiral Shendar, the Valorian commander of the Council's peacekeeper forces, finally spoke. Her voice was melodious but carried an edge of concern. "Commander Morrison, we appreciate humanity's offer to join our alliance. However, we must discuss the concerns that many member species have raised about your people." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand. You're afraid of us." The room fell silent. Several species shifted uncomfortably. It was the Kresh ambassador who responded, his translator converting his clicks into standard language. "Not afraid, Commander, concerned. Your world has gravity twice that of most inhabited planets. Your atmosphere contains oxygen levels that would be toxic to many of us. Your oceans are saltwater, which is corrosive. Your predators are among the most efficient killers we've ever studied. And yet humans thrived there. You became the dominant species through violence and competition." Lisa leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "That's true. Earth is harsh. But it also made us adaptable. We learned to cooperate because we had to. We developed technology because we needed it to survive. And yes, we learned to fight. But we also learned when to stop fighting." "Did you?" another voice challenged. It came from a Tarlaxian, a reptilian species with dark scales and cold eyes. "Your history is filled with wars. You fought each other for thousands of years. Even now, you maintain massive military forces. How can we trust that you won't turn that aggression toward us?" Jake took a breath before answering. "Because we've been where you are now. We know what it's like to face an enemy that wants to destroy everything you've built. And we learned that survival sometimes requires strength, but it also requires knowing who your real enemies are." The Admiral raised one long, crystalline hand. "That brings us to the current crisis. The Vrix Collective has been attacking our outer colonies for 6 months. They are a machine intelligence, perhaps created by a long-dead civilization. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They simply consume resources and expand. We've lost 23 colonies and over 1 million citizens. Our peacekeepers have engaged them in 17 major battles and won none." Danny couldn't help but speak up. "How is that possible? You have energy shields, plasma weapons, faster than light travel. How can machines beat all of that?" The Admiral's luminescent eyes dimmed, a sign of shame in Valorian culture. "Because we fight wars by calculation. We analyze, we plan, we execute precise strategies. The Vrix do the same but faster. They learn from every encounter and adapt. Our tactics become obsolete within days. They predict our movements and counter them. We are fighting a war of logic, and they are better at logic than we are." Jake understood immediately. "You need illogical warriors. You need someone who won't fight by your rules." "We need deathworlders," the Admiral admitted quietly. "The Council has voted to request Earth's military assistance. Specifically, we want your special operations forces, the ones you call Spectres." The room erupted in protests. Several species began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of objections. A Quelon representative stood, water sloshing in his suit. "This is madness. We're inviting predators into our home. Humans are dangerous enough individually, but their special forces are trained killers. They operate in environments that would kill our soldiers in minutes. They use projectile weapons that ignore our shield technology. They are monsters." "We're survivors," Lisa corrected firmly. "And right now you need survivors more than you need safe, predictable allies." Jake pulled up a holographic display. It showed Earth rotating slowly, its blue oceans and green continents visible. "Let me tell you about Spectres. They're selected from our military's best soldiers, then put through training that breaks most candidates. They learn to survive in Arctic temperatures that would freeze your blood solid. They operate in deserts where the heat would cook you inside your own skin. They dive to ocean depths where the pressure would crush your bodies flat. They breathe in toxic environments, fight in zero gravity, and go weeks without supply drops. He changed the image to show training footage. Humans moved through terrain that looked impossible, their movements efficient and deadly. But the real difference isn't physical, it's mental. Spectres are taught to think like predators. They hunt, they adapt. They don't follow a playbook because every mission writes its own rules. You say the Vrix predict your strategies? Spectres don't have strategies in the way you understand them. They have objectives and they accomplish them by whatever means necessary. The Kresh ambassador clicked thoughtfully. You're describing chaos, unpredictability. How do you control such forces? We don't control them, Jake admitted. We point them at the enemy and trust their judgment. That's why they're called specters. They're ghosts that haunt our enemies' nightmares. Admiral Shendar looked at her fellow council members. Many appeared frightened. Some seemed intrigued. All of them looked desperate. Commander Morrison, if we authorize this deployment, can your specters stop the Vrix? Jake met her gaze with absolute confidence. Admiral, the Vrix have never faced anything like us. They've fought your logical, predictable forces. They've never fought someone who evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They've never faced a species that learned to turn violence into an art form. Not because we're cruel, but because we had no choice. Send us to fight your machines, and I promise you this. They'll learn to fear something worse than their own destruction. They'll learn to fear humanity. The vote wasn't unanimous. Several species abstained. But the majority agreed. Earth specters were authorized for deployment. As Jake, Lisa, and Danny left the conference room, they could feel hundreds of alien eyes following them. The galaxy had invited Deathworlders to war. They would soon learn whether that decision would save them or doom them all. The transport ship carrying the first Spectre team arrived at the Council flagship Eternal Horizon 3 days after the authorization vote. Captain Ryan Cole was the first to disembark, his boots making solid contact with the deck that had been specially reinforced to handle human weight. Behind him came his team, Sergeant Nina Brooks, Corporal Alex Turner, and Specialist Megan Ford. They carried equipment that looked primitive compared to the sleek energy weapons of the Peacekeepers, but every piece had been tested in Earth's harshest environments. Ryan was average height for a human, but towered over most of the alien crew members who stopped to stare. His face was weathered from years of outdoor operations, and his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, cataloging exits and potential threats out of pure habit. Nina was shorter but moved with the fluid grace of someone who could slip through spaces that shouldn't accommodate a person. Alex was tall and lean, with the patient stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Megan carried medical gear that seemed excessive until you realized she expected her team to survive injuries that would kill most species outright. Admiral Shendar met them in the hangar bay, her crystalline form reflecting the harsh lights. She had reviewed their service records and found them terrifying. Ryan Cole had survived operations on 4 continents and 3 hostile space stations. Nina Brooks had infiltrated enemy facilities that supposedly had perfect security. Alex Turner held records for the longest confirmed kill shot in human military history. Megan Ford had kept teammates alive through radiation exposure, vacuum breaches, and chemical attacks. Together, they represented something the galaxy had never seen: organized Deathworlder violence. Captain Cole, the Admiral greeted him formally. Welcome aboard. I trust your journey was comfortable? Ryan glanced around the pristine hangar with its perfect temperature control and artificial gravity. Honestly, Admiral, it was too comfortable. My team prefers a little adversity. Keeps us sharp. The Admiral didn't understand if he was joking. Human humor was still a mystery to most species. She led them to the briefing room where dozens of Peacekeeper officers waited. The contrast was stark. The aliens wore elegant uniforms designed for ceremony as much as function. The humans wore practical combat gear in muted colors, covered in pockets and attachment points for equipment. Where the Peacekeepers carried slim energy pistols, the humans had bulky weapons that used chemical propellants to launch solid projectiles at hypersonic speeds. The briefing hologram displayed a mining station on Kepler 442b, a rocky moon orbiting a gas giant. The Vrix captured this facility 8 weeks ago, Admiral Shendar explained. It produces rare elements essential to our shield technology. We've attempted to retake it 3 times. Each assault resulted in total casualties. The Vrix have turned it into a fortress with overlapping defensive systems and hundreds of combat drones. Nina studied the layout with professional interest. Defense in depth, automated responses, predictable patterns. They're expecting another frontal assault. That's why we're not doing one, Ryan stated simply. We're going in quiet. 5 operators, minimal equipment, maximum efficiency. We gather intel on their command structure and eliminate high-value targets. By the time they realize we're there, it'll be too late. A Kresh tactical officer clicked skeptically. 5 soldiers against hundreds of machines? The mathematics are not favorable. Alex spoke for the first time, his voice calm and distant. Math assumes both sides follow the same rules. We don't. The mission briefing continued for an hour. The peacekeepers asked questions that revealed their confusion about human tactics. How would they approach without being detected by thermal sensors? Humans radiated too much heat, they explained. Ryan assured them that his team knew how to manage heat signatures. How would they survive in the moon's thin atmosphere? Humans needed oxygen, didn't they? Megan patted her rebreather equipment and mentioned that Spectres regularly trained at altitudes where there was barely any air at all. What the aliens didn't understand, and what Ryan didn't waste time explaining, was that Deathworlders didn't just adapt to hostile environments. They thrived in them. Earth had taught humanity that comfort was a luxury and adversity was normal. Every Spectre had survived situations that would be considered certain death by Council standards. This mission, for all its apparent danger, was just another day's work. The insertion plan was simple because complex plans fell apart under enemy contact. A stealth pod would drop them during a meteor shower. Using the natural debris as camouflage, they would land 15 kilometers from the mining station and approach on foot through the rocky wasteland. Once inside, they would move through the facility's maintenance passages and air ducts. Space is too small for most species, but perfect for humans. They would locate the Vrix command node, extract data, and eliminate it. Then they would destroy the facility's reactor and extract before the explosion. And if something goes wrong? The Admiral asked. Ryan shrugged. Then we adapt. That's what humans do best. The drop was scheduled for the next day, which gave the team time to prepare. They checked their weapons obsessively, each part disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled. The peacekeepers used energy weapons that never jammed or ran out of power. Human weapons were mechanical devices that required constant maintenance, but they worked in any environment and couldn't be countered by electromagnetic shielding. Nina prepared her demolition charges, enough explosive to level a building but compact enough to fit in her pack. Alex calibrated his railgun, a magnetic accelerator that could punch through armor at ranges the aliens considered impossible. Megan organized her medical supplies, including stimulants that would kill most species, but would keep a human functioning through catastrophic injuries. They slept in the transport ship rather than the comfortable quarters offered by the Admiral. The bunks were hard and the temperature was cooler than the aliens preferred, but it was closer to what they were used to. Ryan lay awake for a while, reviewing the mission parameters in his mind. He'd done insertions like this 100 times on Earth. Hostile territory, overwhelming enemy forces, minimal support. The only difference was that this time the enemy was machines instead of humans, and the terrain was an alien moon instead of a desert or jungle. The morning of the mission arrived. The team geared up in silence, each member performing their pre-combat rituals. Nina tied back her hair. Alex checked his rifle's scope one more time. Megan ran through emergency medical procedures in her head. Ryan looked at his team and felt the familiar calm that came before action. They were ready. In the hangar bay, Admiral Shendar watched them board the stealth pod. Captain Cole, the entire council is monitoring this mission. Billions of beings are depending on your success. Ryan paused at the pod's entrance and looked back at her. Admiral, with respect, we're not doing this for billions of beings. We're doing it for the 5 people in this pod. We keep each other alive, we complete the mission, and we go home. That's how humans operate. The pod sealed and launched moments later. The peacekeepers tracked it on their sensors until it disappeared into the meteor shower. Then they could only wait and watch the vitals of 5 humans dropping toward a hostile moon, hoping that humanity's reputation as Deathworlders was justified. Inside the pod, Ryan felt the familiar acceleration of re-entry. The temperature rose as they hit atmosphere. Outside, meteors burned and exploded around them, providing perfect cover. Alex was already visualizing approach routes. Nina was mentally planning demolition points. Megan was calculating injury probabilities and treatment priorities. They were specters. They were humanity's answer to an uncaring universe that had spent millions of years trying to kill their species. And now they were going to show the galaxy why Earth's children didn't just survive. They hunted. The stealth pod hit the surface of Kepler 442b with enough force to create a small crater. Inside, the 5 specters absorbed the impact through their crash harnesses, their bodies handling acceleration that would have liquefied most alien species. Ryan released his harness first and checked his team. Everyone was green. The pod's outer hull was already cooling, its heat-resistant coating having protected them from the burning entry through the thin atmosphere. They exited quickly into a landscape of rust-colored rocks and dark sky. The moon's gravity was lighter than Earth's, which made their movements easier but required adjustment. The air was thin, barely enough to carry sound, and the temperature was dropping fast as the distant sun disappeared behind the gas giant they orbited. Most species would need full environment suits here. The specters wore light rebreathers and thermal layers under their combat gear. Alex took point, his eyes scanning the horizon through his rifle scope. 15 kilometers of broken terrain stretched between them and the mining station, visible as a cluster of lights in the distance. Nina worked quickly to camouflage the pod with thermal blankets and local rock. They couldn't hide the crater, but they could make it look like a natural meteor impact. Megan checked everyone's oxygen levels while Ryan pulled up the tactical display on his wrist computer. "We move fast and low," Ryan instructed quietly. "Alex, you're on overwatch. Nina, you're on point with me. Megan, stay center and watch our backs. Stay off comms unless necessary. The Vrix might not be monitoring radio, but let's not give them a reason to start." They moved out in tactical formation, covering ground quickly. The lighter gravity let them take longer strides, almost bounding across the terrain. They used the rocky outcroppings for cover, always keeping something between them and the station. Every few hundred meters, Alex would stop and scan ahead through his scope, looking for sensors or patrols. The Vrix relied heavily on automated defenses, but they were predictable. They watched obvious approaches and left blind spots that a thinking enemy could exploit. 2 hours into the approach, Nina raised her fist in the stop signal. Everyone froze. She pointed to the ground ahead where a thin wire stretched between rocks, a simple trap, almost invisible in the dark. She traced its path with her eyes and spotted the mine it was connected to. Rather than disarm it, she marked its location in the team's shared tactical map and led them around it. The Vrix would be monitoring their traps for tampering. Better to leave them untouched and avoid them. The mining station grew larger as they approached. It was a sprawling complex of industrial buildings connected by enclosed corridors. Ore processors, refineries, storage tanks, and at the center, the main control facility where the Vrix command node would be located. Defensive turrets dotted the perimeter, their sensors sweeping in regular patterns. Ryan watched those patterns for 10 minutes, timing them. Machines were precise. That precision became a weakness when facing enemies who understood timing and patience. Nina found their entry point, a damaged section of exterior wall where a storage building had partially collapsed. The gap was too small for the Vrix combat drones, but perfect for humans. They slipped through one at a time, Alex covering their approach, then following last. Inside, they found themselves in darkness. Emergency lights had failed, leaving only the faint glow of active machinery deeper in the facility. They moved through the building using night vision, their footsteps silent on the metal floor. The station still had minimal atmosphere, which meant no sound carried far. Nina led them to a maintenance shaft that connected to the main complex. It was a tight fit, barely wide enough for their shoulders, but specters were used to confined spaces. They crawled through in single file, moving slowly to avoid making noise against the metal walls. The shaft opened into a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the main facility. Here they found the first Vrix drones. The machines were spider-like constructs with multiple legs and sensor clusters. They patrolled in pairs, their metal bodies reflecting the dim light. Ryan signaled his team to hold position while he analyzed their patrol pattern. The drones moved mechanically, checking side passages at regular intervals but always returning to their main route. Alex moved into position with his railgun. The weapon was designed for long range, but it worked perfectly in close quarters too. He waited until both drones were in line with each other, then fired once. The tungsten round punched through the first drone's central processor and continued into the second. Both machines collapsed without making a sound, their systems destroyed before they could transmit an alert. Nina was already moving forward to examine them. The Vrix drones were sophisticated, with redundant systems and networked intelligence. But they had a weakness that the peacekeepers hadn't exploited. They were designed to counter energy weapons. Their armor could ablate plasma and disperse laser strikes. They had electromagnetic shielding against pulse weapons. But they had no defense against solid projectiles moving at hypersonic speeds. The Council's weapons were too advanced. Human weapons were primitive enough to work. The team moved deeper into the facility, eliminating drones as they encountered them. They varied their tactics to avoid pattern recognition. Sometimes Alex would snipe from distance. Sometimes Nina would use explosives to bring down ceiling sections and crush multiple targets. Sometimes they would use knives in close quarters, their Deathworlder strength letting them tear through metal that would resist most species. Aboard the Eternal Horizon, the peacekeepers monitored the team's vital signs and position markers. They watched in growing amazement as the 5 signals penetrated deeper into the facility. They should be detected by now, a Kresh officer muttered. The Vrix sensors should have found them. Admiral Shendar studied the display with fascination and fear. The humans aren't avoiding detection through technology. They're doing it through understanding. They know how the Vrix think because they understand predictable patterns. And they're not fighting like soldiers. Watch their movement. They're not assaulting. They're hunting. It was true. The Spectres moved through the facility like predators stalking prey. They used the environment, waiting in ambush positions, striking from unexpected angles. They didn't fight fair because fair fights were for sports, not survival. Every drone they destroyed was eliminated efficiently, without waste motion or unnecessary risk. This was what millions of years of evolution on a death world produced. Apex predators who had learned to use tools and tactics. Ryan led his team to the central control facility. The Vrix command node was located in a heavily defended chamber deep in the structure. Turrets covered every approach. Drones patrolled in groups. Sensors watched for any intrusion. The peacekeepers had tried to fight through these defenses and failed. The Spectres didn't try to fight through them. They went around. Nina found an air circulation shaft that connected to the command chamber. It was too small for the Vrix drones and too narrow for most species. But humans had flexible shoulders and could compress their bodies into surprisingly small spaces. They crawled through the shaft, ignoring the discomfort, until they reached a vent overlooking the command chamber. The chamber was vast, filled with server banks and processing nodes. At the center stood the Vrix command unit, a larger construct that coordinated all the drones in the facility. It was protected by a dozen combat drones, heavily armored units that bristled with weapons. A direct assault would be suicide. So they didn't assault directly. Nina rigged explosive charges on the facility's main power conduits, while Alex positioned himself at the vent with his railgun. Megan prepared her medical gear because she knew what came next would be violent. Ryan synchronized their attack timing with hand signals. 3, 2, 1. The charges detonated simultaneously, plunging the facility into darkness and emergency mode. Backup power kicked in with flickering lights. The Vrix drones immediately began damage assessment protocols, their attention diverted. That was when Alex started firing. His railgun picked off drones with mechanical precision, each shot destroying a target before they could locate the shooter. Nina dropped down from the vent and sprinted toward the command unit, planting charges as she moved. The Vrix finally understood they were under attack. Turrets swiveled toward the vent. Drones converged on Nina's position. Combat protocols activated and the facility became a killing zone. This was the moment when most assaults failed, when overwhelming firepower met attacking forces. But the Spectres had already accounted for this. Ryan and Megan dropped down to provide covering fire while Alex continued sniping from above. Their primitive projectile weapons punched through shields and armor designed for energy attacks. Nina reached the command unit and jacked her computer directly into its systems. Data began flooding into human encryption. Intelligence on Vrix command structures, facility locations, strategic plans. Ryan fought beside her, his rifle never stopping. Megan kept them both alive, pulling Ryan back when a plasma bolt grazed his shoulder. injecting Nina with a stimulant when shrapnel caught her leg. The VRIX command unit finally recognized the threat and began broadcasting a distress signal. But Nina had anticipated this. The success of the first mission sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. Within hours, every species had reviewed the combat footage captured by the Spectre's helmet cameras. They watched humans move through environments that should have killed them. They saw tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They witnessed violence executed with such precision that it became an art form. Admiral Shendar called an emergency meeting of the military committee. The chamber was packed with representatives who had previously voted against human involvement. Now they sat in silence as the footage played on the central hologram. Ryan Cole and his team appeared like ghosts in the darkness, moving with purpose and deadly efficiency. Each engagement showed the same pattern. The humans analyzed, adapted, and struck with overwhelming force at the exact moment their enemy was most vulnerable. They killed 47 combat drones, a Valorian tactical officer reported, her voice shaking slightly. They destroyed a command node that we estimated would require a full battalion to assault. They accomplished their mission with 0 friendly casualties and extracted with intelligence that has already revealed 3 more VRIX facilities. And they did it all in 5 hours and 43 minutes. A Kelon admiral, his water suit bubbling with agitation, spoke up. I reviewed their combat style. They don't follow engagement protocols. They use ambush tactics, overwhelming force, and they exploit every weakness. When that Sergeant Nina Brooks planted explosives on the power grid, she calculated the exact points that would cause maximum disruption. When the sniper, Alex Turner, engaged multiple targets, he prioritized threats based on capability rather than proximity. They think like predators. Because they are predators, Admiral Shendar responded quietly. We invited them here because we needed predators. Now we're discovering what that truly means. The Council authorized immediate expansion of Spectre operations. Within days, 5 more teams arrived from Earth. Each team consisted of 4 to 6 operators, all of them veterans of combat in the most hostile environments humanity had encountered. Lieutenant Karen Price led a demolition team specialized in destroying hardened targets. Commander Ben Carter commanded a long-range reconnaissance unit that could operate for weeks without support. Each team brought unique skills, but they all shared the same Deathworlder mindset. The VRIX Collective began to experience something it had never felt before: uncertainty. The machine intelligence had calculated every variable in its conflict with the Council. It knew their fleet compositions, their tactical doctrines, their weapon capabilities. It had created counter-strategies for every scenario. But it had no data on humans. Every engagement with Spectre teams produced unexpected results. The machines tried to adapt, but adaptation required understanding, and the VRIX couldn't understand why these beings kept succeeding. On the frozen moon of Titan 7, Karen Price's team assaulted a VRIX manufacturing facility that produced combat drones. The peacekeepers had tried orbital bombardment, but the facility was too heavily shielded. Karen didn't use orbital weapons. She used shaped charges placed precisely on structural weak points, bringing down the entire mountain the facility was built into. The avalanche of ice and rock buried the factory under a kilometer of frozen debris. On the desert world of Eridus III, Ben Carter's reconnaissance team spent 3 weeks observing a VRIX command station. They survived in temperatures that reached 60 degrees during the day and dropped to -40 at night. They drank minimal water and ate rations that most species would find inedible. When they finally called in the assault, they provided targeting data so precise that the Council fleet destroyed the station with a single barrage. Ryan Cole's team continued hitting high-value targets across the conflict zone. They struck supply depots, communications hubs, and processing centers. Each mission ended the same way: total destruction of the target and successful extraction of intelligence. The VRIX began diverting resources to defend against human attacks, which left their main forces vulnerable to peacekeeper assaults. But success came with a cost that the Council hadn't anticipated. As they watched more combat footage, as they saw more VRIX facilities destroyed, the alien species began to truly understand what humanity represented. It wasn't just that humans were effective soldiers. It was how they approached violence. A Kresh psychologist presented findings to the Council that disturbed everyone present. Humans have a unique relationship with aggression, she explained, her mandibles clicking nervously. Most species evolved as prey animals who developed intelligence to avoid predators. We fight when necessary, but violence makes us uncomfortable. Humans evolved as both predator and prey. They were hunted by creatures stronger than them, so they learned to hunt those creatures back. Violence isn't uncomfortable for them. It's natural. She displayed brain scans taken during human combat. Look at their neurological patterns. When engaged in battle, their bodies produce chemicals called adrenaline and endorphins. These enhance their physical capabilities and reduce pain sensation. But more than that, these chemicals create what humans call a rush. Combat doesn't just frighten them. Part of them enjoys it. Not the killing itself, but the challenge. The test of their abilities against an opponent. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter. A Valorian representative stood, her crystalline body flickering with distress. Are you saying that humans are addicted to violence? That they seek out combat for pleasure? No, the psychologist corrected. I'm saying they're adapted to it in ways we aren't. A Spectre team leader named Ryan Cole has a saying, "We don't fight because we enjoy killing. We fight because we enjoy winning." It's subtle but important. They're competitive beings who were shaped by a world where losing meant death. They've learned to channel that aggression into protection and strategy. Dr. Lisa Grant, who had remained on Zenith Prime as humanity's liaison, requested permission to speak. She stood before the assembled council with calm dignity. I understand your concern. Looking at humanity from the outside, we must seem terrifying. But let me share some context. Yes, Earth made us strong and aggressive, but it also made us cooperative. Humans survived because we worked together. A single human couldn't bring down a mammoth, but a group with coordination and tools could. We didn't develop claws or armor. We developed communication and teamwork. She pulled up images of Earth's history. You see our wars and think we're violent. But consider this. We're the only known species that developed rules for warfare. The Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, the concept of war crimes. We created these because we understood that unchecked violence destroys everyone. Every Spectre team you've deployed is bound by strict rules of engagement. They don't harm civilians. They don't use excessive force against defeated enemies. They fight with extreme violence when necessary, but they also know when to stop. A Tarlaxian general, one who had initially opposed human involvement, spoke up. Dr. Grant, I've watched your Spectres operate. They're efficient, yes, but they also show mercy. In the facility assault, Sergeant Brooks disabled a drone that was attempting to retreat. She could have destroyed it. Why didn't she? Lisa smiled. Because it was no longer a threat. That's the difference between aggression and cruelty. Spectres are aggressive when needed. They're not cruel. They understand that violence is a tool, not an end in itself. Over the following weeks, more Spectre teams deployed across the war zone. The Vrix Collective found itself fighting a war on two fronts. The Peacekeepers engaged their main forces in conventional battles, slowly pushing them back with improved tactics. Meanwhile, Spectre teams destroyed their infrastructure and eliminated command nodes. The machine intelligence was being systematically dismantled, but the other Council species were learning something unexpected. They began to understand that humans weren't just effective because of their physical capabilities or their aggressive nature. They were effective because they understood something fundamental about conflict that the peaceful species had never grasped. Sometimes survival requires decisive action. Sometimes mercy means being strong enough to protect the weak. Sometimes peace requires those willing to fight for it. A young Valorian officer named Tesharal requested permission to observe a Spectre team training session. Admiral Shendar approved, curious what the officer would learn. Tesharal spent a day with Ryan Cole's team as they prepared for their next mission. She watched them practice combat techniques that looked brutal and efficient. She saw them discuss tactics that seemed reckless but were actually carefully calculated risks. At the end of the day, she asked Ryan a question that had been bothering her. Captain Cole, how do you live with what you do? How do you reconcile violence with morality? Ryan considered his answer carefully. Officer Tesharal, let me ask you something. If someone threatened your family, what would you do? I would call for security forces. I would seek legal protection. And if there was no time, if the threat was immediate, the Valorian was silent for a moment. I suppose I would fight. I would do whatever necessary to protect them. The war against the Vrix Collective had reached its critical phase. After months of Spectre operations destroying infrastructure and gathering intelligence, the Council finally located the enemy's central processing hub. It was a massive space station orbiting a neutron star, protected by layers of automated defenses and hundreds of combat drones. The Vrix Command Intelligence resided there, coordinating all operations across dozens of star systems. Destroy it, and the entire collective would collapse into disconnected fragments. Admiral Shendar stood in the command center of the Eternal Horizon, surrounded by holographic displays showing the assembled Council fleet. 300 ships from 40 different species, representing the largest military force the galaxy had ever gathered. But she knew that ships and firepower alone wouldn't win this battle. The station's defenses were too strong. They needed boots on the deck, soldiers who could fight through the interior and destroy the core intelligence. They needed the Spectres. 20 teams had been assembled for the assault. 100 human operators, the largest concentration of Deathworlder special forces ever deployed. Captain Ryan Cole would coordinate the ground operation from the lead assault ship. His team, now veterans of a dozen successful missions, would spearhead the main thrust into the station's core. Lieutenant Karen Price would lead demolition teams to destroy power systems. Commander Ben Carter's reconnaissance units would map the interior and identify critical targets. Every Spectre who had survived the war so far was being committed to this final battle. The briefing room was packed with humans in combat gear. The contrast with earlier meetings was stark. These weren't representatives or diplomats. These were warriors who had proven themselves in the galaxy's harshest environments. They bore scars from plasma burns, shrapnel wounds, and injuries that would have killed most species. But they were alive, functional, and ready to fight. Ryan stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Listen up. This is what we've been working toward. Every mission, every sacrifice, every drop of blood we've shed has been building to this moment. The Vrix Hub is the heart of their operation. We cut it out and this war is over. He activated the holographic display showing the station's layout. It was enormous, kilometers across, with hundreds of sections and thousands of defensive positions. The fleet will engage the exterior defenses and create breaches. We're going in through multiple entry points, 20 teams hitting 20 different sections simultaneously. The Vrix will try to consolidate their forces. We don't let them. We move fast, hit hard, and keep them reacting instead of planning. Karen Price stood up. My demolition teams will target the station's power grid. Once we knock out main power, their automated defenses will switch to backup systems. That's when their efficiency drops. They'll still be dangerous, but they'll be slower. Ben Carter added his piece. Recon teams will be feeding real-time intelligence to all units. We've studied Vrix architecture for months. We know their patterns, but expect surprises. This is their headquarters. They'll have defenses we haven't seen before. A young Spectre named Chris Palmer raised his hand. What about casualties? The Peacekeepers lost entire assault forces trying to crack fortified Vrix positions. Ryan met his gaze steadily. We're not Peacekeepers. We're Deathworlders. We trained for this. Every single person in this room has survived situations that should have killed them. You've all earned the right to be here. But I won't lie to you. Some of us won't make it back. The Vrix know we're coming. They know what we're capable of. They're going to throw everything at us. He paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from barely 20 years old to veterans approaching 50. But here's what they don't know. They don't know what it means to fight for something beyond programming. They don't understand sacrifice or determination. They calculate odds, but they can't calculate human spirit. We're going in there to end this war, and we're going to succeed because failure isn't an option. Not for us. Not for the billions of beings counting on us. The room erupted in determined affirmations. These were soldiers who understood the stakes. They had seen Vrix atrocities firsthand. They had fought through impossible odds. They were ready. The assault began with a massive fleet bombardment. Council ships opened fire with every weapon they possessed, overwhelming the station's shields with concentrated plasma fire. The Vrix responded with defensive batteries that tore through ships like paper. The space around the neutron star became a graveyard of burning debris and exploding reactors. But the assault continued. For every ship destroyed, 2 more moved forward. The first breach appeared on the station's northern section. Ryan's team was first through, their assault pod punching through the damaged hull and deploying them directly into a Vrix stronghold. They hit the deck running, weapons firing before they had fully oriented themselves. Drones converged from all directions, but the Spectres had trained for exactly this scenario. They moved as a unit, each member covering angles and creating overlapping fields of fire. Nina threw a shaped charge that brought down a bulkhead, blocking one approach. Alex set up a defensive position and began picking off drones with mechanical precision. Megan kept everyone's vitals monitored, calling out injuries and administering treatment without breaking stride. Ryan led them forward, his tactical computer tracking all 20 Spectre teams as they penetrated deeper into the station. The other entry points saw similar scenes. Karen Price's team blasted through an equipment bay and immediately began planting charges on power conduits. Ben Carter's reconnaissance unit slipped through maintenance shafts, mapping the interior and marking targets. Every team faced overwhelming resistance. Every team pushed forward anyway. The Vrix Collective finally unleashed everything it had been holding in reserve. Combat drones, twice the size of previous models, emerged from concealed positions. Automated turrets with improved targeting systems filled corridors with plasma fire. The station's artificial intelligence began adapting in real time, learning from each engagement and adjusting tactics. It was learning to fight humans, but humans were learning too. When the Vrix started using plasma saturation to deny corridors, the Spectres went through walls instead. When the drones began moving in larger groups, the humans used their own numbers against them, funneling them into kill zones. When the station's AI tried to cut off their advance by sealing bulkheads, Karen's demolition team simply made new paths. Ryan's team reached a central junction where 3 corridors met. It was a perfect ambush point, and the Vrix knew it. They had filled the area with dozens of drones and created overlapping fields of fire. A frontal assault would be suicide. So Ryan didn't assault frontally. He sent Nina through the ventilation system to get above the enemy position, while Alex set up to provide covering fire. Then he, Megan, and 2 other Spectres charged directly into the kill zone. It looked like madness. Plasma bolts filled the air, cutting through space where they had been milliseconds before. But the humans weren't moving randomly. They were using a tactic called violence of action, where overwhelming aggression in close quarters created chaos that disrupted enemy coordination. The Vrix drones were designed for ranged combat and had poor close quarters capabilities. The humans exploited this weakness ruthlessly. Nina dropped from above, landing directly on a drone and driving her combat knife through its central processor. Alex's covering fire destroyed drones trying to reposition. Ryan and his team moved through the enemy formation like a storm, their weapons never stopping. In 30 seconds, the ambush point was clear. In 35 seconds, they were moving forward again. Aboard the Eternal Horizon, Admiral Shendar watched the battle with amazement and horror. The Spectres were succeeding, but the cost was mounting. Team vitals showed injuries accumulating. Several operators had been killed by lucky shots or overwhelming fire. But the advance continued. Every team that lost a member absorbed the survivors and kept pushing forward. There was no retreat, no hesitation, just relentless forward momentum. The Vrix command intelligence finally understood what it was facing. These weren't normal soldiers who could be stopped by calculation and superior firepower. These were beings who thrived on adversity, who became more dangerous when wounded, who fought harder when the odds were against them. The machine intelligence did something it had never done before. It felt something approximating fear. Ryan's team reached the central core, a vast chamber where the Vrix command intelligence resided. It was a sphere of processing power suspended in the center of the room, protected by energy shields and surrounded by the most advanced combat drones the collective had produced. This was the final test. This was where the war would be decided. All teams, this is Cole, Ryan broadcast. We're at the core. Beginning final assault. Price, how's that power grid looking? Charges are set, Karen responded from her position. Say the word and this station goes dark. Do it. The explosions rippled through the station's power systems. Main power failed. Emergency lights flickered on. The Vrix drones hesitated for a fraction of a second as they switched to backup systems. That fraction of a second was all the Spectres needed. 20 teams converged on the core chamber from every direction. The Vrix threw everything at them, but